Chapter 17, Program Design for Resistance Training. So within this chapter, we'll be going over how to set up a program. And this chapter really does highlight the importance of a strength and conditioning professional, because there's much more that goes into designing a program for an athlete than just do they want to get stronger, faster, bigger, etc. Okay, there's a lot of evaluation and assessing that goes into developing the best program for the athlete that ensures, one, safety, and also two, that they're going to make progress. Okay, and so within this, you'll see really, like I talk about, the art of a strength coach, learning how to assess the athlete, evaluate the sport and the athlete. And then from there, once you know what kind of athlete you have, what type of sport they're training for, then you go into designing and implementing the program. And we'll just find all these coming in the chapter, but you'll be looking at load, volume, repetitions, sets, rest period, how to then, with all that, exercise order, looking at how should you structure a program, what order the exercise should go in. Okay, so there's a lot of aspects that go into designing a program merely than just getting them stronger and faster. Okay, and that's why a strength coach needs to know how do you really needs to know all aspects of their athletes and the sport that they're coaching for. And that's going to make for the best implementation of the program, allow for the athlete to recover, to stay safe, stay healthy, and make as much progress as much as possible. Chapter 17, Program Design for Resistance Training. Chapter objectives will be to go through the evaluation of the sport and the athlete and assessing the athlete, selecting exercise based on type, sport specificity, technique, experience, equipment, and time availability. Determine training frequency, and that's going to be based on status, sports season, load, exercise type, and other concurrent exercise. Arrange exercise in the training session. Determine 1 repetition maximum. Predict 1 RM, and then from a multiple repetition maximums and RM loads. Assign load and repetitions based on the training goal. Know when and by how much an exercise-based load should be increased. Assign training volumes according to the athlete's training status and training goal. And determine rest period lengths based on the training goal. So you can see from the objective right here that there's a lot that goes into the whole entire strength and conditioning profession. Okay, there's a lot that a strength coach needs to be able to do to ensure the well-being, the safety, and the providing the correct stimulus for the athlete to be able to be successful in their sport. It's much more than just assigning exercises. A good strength coach is going to know overall their athlete, the demands of the athlete, and how to completely assess it. And there's a lot that goes into assessing the needs of the athlete. That's why a lot of times people refer to strength and conditioning as the art of strength coaching, because there's an art form to it, be able to create, I guess you could say, some kind of masterpiece within your athletes. Okay, you want to create something that's going to be long-lasting. It's going to have longevity, and it's going to bring about the greatest amount of success, that is through the performance. Okay, so the old days of strength coaches where they were just a bunch of old meatheads out there just throwing weights around, there's still that part of within the DNA of every strength coach, that aspect, but really has progressed over the last number of years to where we're at right now, to where you're dealing with the new level athletes, and coaches really have to be keen on their craft, be able to develop these athletes to be successful. So looking at resistance training program within the design variables, these are all the aspects that we'll cover throughout this chapter, getting into the objectives, but really this, you can sum it up into these factors right here. You got needs analysis, exercise selection, training frequency, exercise order, training load and repetitions, volume, and rest period. This is everything a coach needs to look at and understand when going into designing a program for their athlete. So you look at needs analysis. It says a two-stage process that includes 1, an evaluation of the requirements and characteristics of the sport, and 2, an assessment of the athlete. So look at the evaluation of the sport. Well, 1 is you got to look at the movement analysis. What body and limb movements are the prime movers within the movement patterns? And then once you know that, then you'll be able to know the muscular involvement. Okay, and then you kind of know where should your focus be. You also need to know the physiological analysis. You got the strength, power, hypertrophy, or muscle endurance priorities. And injury analysis. Common sites for joint and muscle injury and causative factors. So when you look at the evaluation of the sport, this really is the merging. When we talk about exercise scientists or sport scientists, whatever, you need to know both biomechanics and exercise physiology together. Okay, you can see the movement analysis is your biomechanics, and then of course the physiological is the phys part. So really this is the merging of those two areas to really enhance the overall sports science, exercise science realm. Then you got the assessment of the athletes, so you need to look at what's their training status. So therefore that's going to determine what type of training program you'll implement. The length of recent regular participation in previous training programs. It help you know what level of intensity within the program and the degree of exercise technique experience. Okay, these are all factors you need to go into then your athlete. So for instance, do I have a young athlete versus an old athlete? You know, I'm going to train a high school student much different than a college athlete versus a professional athlete. Most likely should be the college and professional athletes should have sufficient technique, so therefore you'll be able to train them at a greater intensity than you would a high school. And I say should be, you know, you'd be surprised that even at the collegiate level and higher, sometimes technique's not the best, but for the most part, you're going to train those more mature athletes differently than you would a younger athlete. So those are all things you need to look at. What type of training athlete do you have? And then also what sport are you trying to train them within? Here's an example of an overall picture of a training program based upon what type of athlete you have. So you see you got beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And that's kind of based off training age. And then from there, the more mature they are, the more frequency training sessions you have through the week. And like you see, those who are advanced are going to have 3 to 4 or greater than 3 to 4 frequency per week, as opposed to beginners, really no more than 2 per week. And if you got intermediate, kind of in the middle, somewhere around 2 to 3. And so based upon that, you could train those more mature athletes a lot more through the week, a lot more in the workouts, a lot higher intensity, all that just because of their training status. But the biggest thing here is when you're starting to develop and start training athletes, if they are beginners, do not push them more than what they are capable of doing. And you see that beginner, someone who's untrained, really no more than 2 days per week. You really don't want to push more than that because you want retention, you want safety, and you want to keep them healthy. And so if you injure an athlete or you push them too much and they don't like it, there's a good chance you might lose them, especially in the high school area. You know, athletes more likely to quit at that point than the more elite status. But you get those younger athletes, push them too much, they quit. Well, you've just lost an athlete. So you really need to walk that fine line of how hard to push beginners without getting them to where they want to quit. But you also don't want to go too low because you still need to make progress. You still need to make gains. You still need to develop them. So this is once again going what the strength coach needs to do, and that is really know their athletes and know how hard to push as opposed to when to pull back a little bit. Okay, when you're looking at assessing the athlete, you'll have physical testing evaluation. It says tests should relate to the athlete's sports. Okay, use the results of the movement analysis to select test. After testing, compare results with normative or descriptive data to determine athlete strengths and weaknesses. Okay, when you're looking at assessing the athlete and testing them, like it says, you should relate to an athlete sport. Well, a 3-mile run time is not going to be really relatable to the football player. Okay, and your 40-yard dash is not really applicable to, a cross-country runner. So you really need to select tests that are going to really reflect that sport. Okay, a vertical jump is a great test for power athletes, for football. And so that would be a good test there. Okay, vertical jump, not so much for endurance athletes. Okay, and vice versa for the different tests. But just know, like when you're testing an athlete, make sure you select the test that's really going to reflect kind of the needs of that athlete itself. And then when you're looking at the primary resistance training goals, focus on, okay, what is going, and this part right here is kind of looking for all athletes here. Okay, once again, when you're assessing the athlete in the sport, what are the main, because every athlete needs to resistance training to some extent. But what is the main goal of your sport? Then you're going to kind of go from there to looking at the training goals. So football, high strength, high power. Okay, endurance athletes, they need to be doing a lot more muscular endurance. Lower weight, we'll get into, I'll define load and volume, all that stuff coming up here in a bit, but just for right now, for endurance, body weight type exercises. So the higher repetitions, lower weight type would be more advantageous to them. Okay, and when you're training and developing this training goal, no matter what your focus is, whether strength, power, hypertrophy, or muscular endurance, focus on that one outcome per season or per time block. Okay, don't be trying to do strength and muscular endurance at once. Okay, pick one or the other and focus on that. That should be your main focus for your certain time block, and stick to that and only that. Okay, and then here's your general training priorities. This says by sports season. So when you're looking at, in the next chapters, we'll define macro, meso, micro cycles. But remember, macro cycle is your long-term program. Mesocycle is chunks of that broken up. So if, let's just say you think of football ending in January for college, starting up in August. Well, the macro cycle will basically be that 1 year period right there. Mesocycle is smaller breaks of that. So maybe every month or so would be a mesocycle, maybe every 2 months. And the microcycle is the mesocycle broken up even further to like a week to like a couple of weeks. So if you look within one giant macrocycle, you might have one mesocycle off season, one preseason, in season, and postseason. Okay, so you're going to break up your training cycle based upon kind of the time of the year that you're looking at, and you're going to start rearranging your training based upon that. So for instance, off season, where you're just all you're doing is training, no competition. Well, you see your sport practice is low, but your resistance training is going to be high. Okay, so during the off season, athletes might be meeting once a week just to go over running plays or going through something like that, or just running routes, throwing the ball and catching something where you're just doing very little of that. Well, that time you want the resistance training to be high, because there's only so much you do per given cycle. Okay, you can't be lifting super, super heavy and practicing super, super heavy as well. The body will break down eventually. So you got to kind of know how to adjust that. And so you can see in the off season, they recommend hypertrophy and muscular endurance kind of be your focus during this time period. And then later into it, you start focusing more strength and power. Then you have preseason. This is, if you're looking at football, the off season would be basically like January to maybe May-ish. And then the preseason would be kind of throughout the summer, leading up to then August when the season really starts. So here, do more sport movement specific. So high strength, power, endurance, kind of depending on the sport though. And here you're starting to reduce the resistance training down, but then that's because sport practice is going up a little bit. And then during season, this is basically just a maintenance. Okay. And here you have high sport practice, low resistance training at that time point. And then postseason, it's just going to vary. Just all kind of depends. Okay. It just kind of depends on the coaches, the program, and the athletes. But those are the four prior or seasons: off season, preseason, in season, and postseason. Getting into exercise selection. Okay, this needs to be chosen based upon the following: the movement and muscular requirements of the sport, an athlete's exercise technique experience, the equipment available, the amount of training time available. So the main ones you'll be looking at is going to be core and assistant exercises. Core are those that recruit one or more large muscle groups, involve two or more primary joints, and receive priority because of the direct application of the sport. Classic core example exercise is going to be the clean, the jerk, the snatch, front squat, back squat, deadlifts, bench press. Okay, those are your core exercises. And then you have assistant exercises. So you got recruit smaller areas, involve only one primary joint, less important in improving sport performance. This would be like an overhead press, so military press, RDLs, leg curls, leg extensions, something along those lines. And within core and assistance, you also have structural and power exercises. So the structural will be emphasizing loading the spine directly or indirectly. So a squat would be a structural exercise. And then you have power exercises. So they're structural, but they're performed quickly or explosively. So your Olympic lifts, clean, jerk, snatch are all power exercises because they do load the spine, but they do it very quickly or explosively. So those are all the types of exercises to be known when you're building up your program. So you got sport-specific exercises. The more similar the training activities to the actual movement, the greater likelihood there will be a positive transfer to that sport. Okay, once again, I always say the Olympic lifts are a strong sport-specific exercise. Okay, because Olympic lifts train power, they train acceleration, they train deceleration, they train strength, they train flexibility. So those ones have a huge sport specific because they really do transfer over to most aspects of the sport. So this concept is called training specificity or specific adaptation to imposed demands. Okay, so the SAID principle is basically you're only going to make adaptations to a system if you specifically train that system. Okay, you put a stimulus on that system itself and you push it further past the point that it's comfortable at. Okay, so if I want to build a cardiovascular system, well, I need to train a specific training to that. And it means I need to do a lot of running, I need to do a lot of cycling, rowing, whatever the case is, to really, with my heart rate up high, to really specifically increase the demands on the cardiovascular system. So that's what the SAID principle is. Basically, you're only going to adapt if you push the system further past the point where it's used to being at. Okay, this is where you got to constantly making new stimulus, adding more weight or reducing rest times or doing something to really start increasing that stimulus on that system. Okay, and the sport-specific exercises like the Olympic lifts, that's not the only ones that transfer over. I was just using that as an example for resistance training transferring over to the field. Okay, a baseball pitcher might do a lot of rubber band work with the upper extremity. Okay, that's something that could be sport specific for pitching motions. Okay, work on that range of motion and some stability exercises and things like that. Okay, those are kind of sport specifics. But I will say though, a lot of times when we are talking sport specific, they are really talking in terms of weight training like the Olympic lifts, those explosive type movements. Then you got muscle balance, so agonist and antagonist. So the agonist being the group of muscles or muscle causing the movement, antagonist, sometimes the passive muscle groups located on the opposite side of the limb. So make sure to know what those when you're training, you don't want to have an imbalance between the two. One you always notice, we've talked about a lot, definitely about mechanics who've had it with me, is ACL tears are a result of having too weak hamstrings compared to the quadriceps. So there's the imbalance right there. What's the one example of a bad imbalance? You got exercises to promote recovery. It says do not involve high muscle stress or high stress on the nervous system. Promote movement and restoration. So make sure when you're recovering, going through like a deloading week or something, reducing intensity, you don't want to stress the muscle and the nervous system that much. And that's why these rest times are good, is because they allow the nervous system to really kind of calm down, get back to firing at a normal rate. So that's good when you're trying to recover. Lower the intensity to ensure that. And there's just here's examples of just a bunch of different exercises with different movement patterns. So make sure you kind of look through those and kind of have an idea on all those. So it says technique experience. So do not assume the athlete will perform exercise correctly. Just like we've done with the squats. Most of y'all did squats properly for the lab, but you always need to make sure, just don't assume your athletes know how to do it. So always make sure you know how to clearly explain, talk, show, and then when they start to go through it, then reassess. If there's any doubt, have the athlete demonstrate the exercise and give instructions. Okay, number one is safety. So never assume they know what they're doing. Just have them go through and do it, and then if they know how to do it, well, no harm, no foul. You look at the availability of resistance training equipment. Okay, not every gym is loaded up with everything a strength coach wants, so you really have to adapt to what is given to you. Sometimes you might be on the road training, or on the road competing. What happens then? Well, you might have access to, there's a lot of times athletes stay in the hotel, and the only thing they have access to is just a few dumbbells in the hotel weight room. Well, baseball's really known for this. Coaches will just have the athletes go in the hotel weight room and a couple of dumbbells. You got to make do with what you have right there to get some kind of workout in. So be able to adapt. And they also know available training time per session. Most coaches only have an hour a couple times a week with their athletes. So you really need to know how to prioritize the program to get the most efficient out of that time. Usually it's about an hour or so. Okay, time is limited when you're working with athletes, especially at the collegiate level. Then you got frequency. So it's the number of training sessions completed in a given time period. Usually it's 1 week. It's not how many days you train. I know all the tables show days per week. When you're looking at frequency, it really should be training sessions. Okay, so think of it as that, not just how many days a week you're training, but how many training sessions throughout the week are you getting. And with training status, so this will affect the number of rest days needed between sessions. Those who have a higher training status don't need as many rest days, and sometimes they can even get, you can see the bottom down there, your trained athletes could do a split routine. That is, they could do 2 routines in one day. They might split it up and do certain muscle groups in the morning, certain muscle groups in the afternoon. Okay, so the more trained you are, the more sessions per week an athlete's able to do. It says a frequency of 3 workouts per week is recommended for many to allow sufficient recovery between sessions. Most of your programs, your high programs like your collegiate program are usually 3 to 4 for football. Baseball might be 3 per week. And of course, that's all going to change too. We'll see here in a bit. But based upon, are you in season versus preseason versus in season? Your training frequencies are going to go down, but all you really need, just because you're competing, so that adds more stress in the body. So all you really need, like I last said, 3 workouts per week is recommended to allow sufficient recovery. Well, really, 3 per week too is really all you need to maintain as well for in season. Sometimes you only really need 2 days per week to maintain during the in season. Okay, but your session is going to be based upon what kind of athlete you have, how long they've been training, and what season are you in throughout the year. You can see the training stats here, different sessions per week. Advanced can do 4 to 7. You can even have upwards of 10 sessions per week. You might have a couple split routines through the week. So nonetheless, it's just, you should look at it as that as opposed to days, just because you might have an advanced athlete, might do a bunch of 2 days. And you see a common split routine, just hammering out the different muscle groups on the different days. Like you see the different splits. One, you do upper body versus lower body days. It's a pretty common one for general population or with athletics. Just doing, one day, Monday you see lower body, Tuesday upper body, Wednesday rest, Thursday lower, Friday upper. Or you can see the other routine just kind of broken up into the muscle groups of the week. You can see they're training each muscle group twice per week. So there's a lot of variation on how to train. You only have to split it up this way. You can also do your frequency by what exercises, what focus of the day. Maybe Monday wants to be a snatch focus day. Tuesday could be an upper body focus, something like that. Wednesday could be a lower body focus. Thursday could be a clean focus day. Something along the lines of that as well. And then it says the seasonal demands of sport based upon time availability. And you can see the different days or the sessions per week altering between what type of sport they're in or what sport season they're in. In season says 1 to 3. A good example looking at that is football, especially at collegiate level. You got the big game coming up, versus, I'll just use, of course, LSU and Alabama. Not this year. It's a bad game. But anyways, normally that's a big game for both teams. And so what you're looking at for them that week is they're probably only going to be training 2 days per week that week, because they're trying to be as fresh and rested for Saturday as much as possible. Okay, that's going to be different than the beginning season when normal these teams play kind of like a lower Division I program, and maybe even someone from a smaller conference, something like that. They might train 3 days that week because that game against the fluff schools, they call it, is not really going to be that demanding, so they could get away with training more through the week. As opposed when you have the big game versus Alabama, they might only do 2. That way they won't be fully rested for that game. Okay, baseball is kind of an odd one, especially at the collegiate level, is because your biggest training block is actually in season. Because baseball usually starts in January, and then the College World Series all the way in June. So you're looking at about 6 months of in-season, thereabouts. And you might be, even the days that you are competing, you might be getting a resistance training in maybe the morning of the game. But baseball is a different demand than football. Okay, baseball is not really a physically demanding sport, so you could get away with more training sessions throughout the week, especially on the days you're competing, than you can with football. So this is where it goes into the evaluation, the needs analysis of the athlete. Okay, what athlete do you have, and what's the needs of that sport? And then from there, you start to develop, all right, what exercises do I want to do, and then how often am I going to have training sessions? Then you got the training load and exercise type. So as an athlete, you train with maximal, near maximal loads, require more recovery time before the next training session. Okay, once again, recovery needs to be thrown in just as much as the actual training days. Some other training considerations, influenced by overall amount of physical stress. That's kind of what we were talking about earlier with, example would be game week and what game you're playing that week for football. You also need to consider the effects of other aerobic and anaerobic training, sports skill practice, and demanding occupations. So this is why you cut back on training through the in season because, for football, for instance, athletes are spending 2 to 3 hours practicing every day. And Nick Saban, Coach Saban for Alabama, is famous for making his athletes run way more than they need to. Obviously, it shows on the field because Alabama is as good as they are, but he is known for making his athletes run a lot. Well, 2 to 3 hours of practice plus all the conditioning is really going to add on top of the stress of the body. So therefore, you can't be putting as much work in the weight room as you would maybe for other teams. And that's one reason why, arguably, Alabama wins all the time is because of the amount of training that the coach puts the athletes through. You got exercise order. So it's going to be based, and it says performed during one training session when you're looking at with this. It's just what's the order through one training session. And it's always going to go power, other core, then assistant exercises. Your power exercises you see here, snatch, cleans, power cleans, hang cleans, push jerks, needs to be performed first because that's when you need to be the freshest and you want to be able to develop the most training adaptation, the most stimulus with this because this is the exercises that are going to give you the most transfer training to the field. So you want to be the freshest for those. So you do those power exercises first, then you do non-power core exercises. So squats, bench press, deadlifts. And then you move to assistant exercises, the single joint, single muscle group type exercises. Then you got upper and lower body exercises. Kind of talked about the split. It's a good way to kind of keep athletes fresh if you have to do a lot of training in one session. And then it says if exercises are performed with minimal rest periods, this is considered circuit training. So circuit training will be short rest periods, but the exercises themselves will be low loads and then higher repetitions. You also have push and pull exercises. So one day you can have all your athletes do push, and the next day do all pull exercises. So you see right here, push exercises would be bench press, shoulder press, tricep extensions, and squats for lower body, considered push exercises. And then pulling exercises would be lat pull downs, bent over rows, bicep curls. Your deadlifts would be considered a pull exercise. You also do super and compound sets. Super set is doing 2 exercises, sequential exercises that stress 2 opposing muscle groups or muscle areas. So you do an agonist and an antagonist together with no rest. So you go like bicep curls right into tricep press downs. That'd be a super set because you're doing 2 opposing muscle groups. A compound set would be where you're doing the same muscle group performed with no rest. So you could be doing like bench press right into chest flies. That would be a compound set. You got training load and repetitions. So terminology, when you're looking at trying to quantify and qualify mechanical work. So you got mechanical work is defined as force multiplied by displacement. You got volume load. So it's a practical measure for the quantity of work performed in resistance training. And volume load looks at weight units by repetitions. It says arrangement of repetitions and sets affects the intensity value, a measure of the quality of the work performed. So you're looking at, load, volume load right there. Sometimes you say weight by repetitions. That's going to affect, because with that, then you kind of know how much mechanical work's being done somewhat. So it kind of helps you to know how to know what's the intensity to get all this, because once you start to, if you're not careful, you could push too high a volume, too high of intensity. Well, that's going to start imposing way too much stress on the body. The body will start to break down eventually. And so that's why it says the heavier the load, the lower number of repetitions that can't be performed. So it's a inverse relationship. Load goes up, repetitions go down. So you kind of need to know what we're looking at with what the volume is, what repetitions, to kind of really start to develop a program that keeps the athlete making gains and not stressing too much. And we're looking at loads all based off 1 RM or percentage of the repetition. When you're based off of 1 repetition maximum, you're doing a percentage of that. We'll show you there's a table coming up soon about that. So you got some other key terms. So volume, the total amount of weight lifted in a training session. Set, a group of repetitions performed before the athlete stops to rest. Repetition volume, total number of repetitions performed during a workout session. And then volume load, as we said, total number of sets multiplied by number of repetitions per set, multiplied by the weight lifted per rep. You kind of see that as defined back here as well. Okay, that's what the weight units by repetitions is. So you're looking at weight lifted by set by repetitions. So these are all good ways in volume, or these are all good ways to kind of set up a program, volume being one of the best, just because the closer you get to the season, volume's going to go down. You're not going to, this is the total amount of weight lifted. That's repetitions by sets. And so, I'm sorry, not repetitions by sets. You could look at volume as total number of repetitions. And you look at that as well, also looking at weight as well. So when you're looking at volume, it's going to go down because you're doing less and less overall repetitions, getting closer to the season, because weight is going up. So you're lifting more, but you're lifting less repetitions overall. So volume is one thing you need to look at, because the greater the volume, the greater stress on the body. And you don't want to be having this huge stress on the body leading up to the season, because then you can start to then impose some kind of overtraining. So here, load says most simplistically refers to the amount of weight assigned to exercise set, often characterized as the most critical aspect of a resistance training program. 1 repetition maximum, so the greatest amount of weight that can be lifted with proper technique for only 1 repetition. And repetition maximum, most weight lifted for a specific number of repetitions. You can see the table here. This is a good table to use kind of to know what percentage of 1 RM you're training at. And that's knowing that if you do these repetitions to their fullest, that means, like, for instance, a lot of time, we'll see coming up here for strength. If you want to train for strength, you need to train less than 6 repetitions. You can see 6 repetitions equates to 85% of 1 RM. And so with that means 6 full, complete repetitions where they're all difficult to perform without any help. There's where you know you're lifting about 85% of your 1 RM. We'll get into how to assess the 1 RM here in a sec, but this will help you understanding kind of the load. So if you know someone's 1 RM and you want them to be training 6 repetitions, then you can figure out how much weight they could be lifting there, instead of having athletes just kind of guess where they should be at. So this is a great chart to use for developing overall the program, getting the load, getting the volume, how much you want to be training, how much reps, how much sets, and so forth. So you got 1 RM and multiple RM testing options. So testing the 1 RM. I'll show you how to do that here in a sec. It says 1 RM testing requires adequate training status and experience with the exercise being tested. Choose core exercises for 1 RM testing. And choose exercises that can accurately and consistently assess muscle strength and allow the athlete to maintain correct body position throughout the testing. You can estimate a 1 RM using the table. So if you know someone knows how to, it shows you right here. To estimate, if you kind of know what somebody's X amount of repetitions are, then you could estimate out, like if someone did 6 reps at a certain weight, and you can see that there's 6 complete full reps or whatever, and they didn't get help with a spotter, but the sixth one was kind of really difficult for them to do, you could kind of then estimate out, well, just do the reverse of how to figure out 85% of what your 1RM. Just do the reverse and it'll tell you kind of estimated one repetition maximum there. You also do multiple RM testing based on goal repetitions. So this requires a strength and conditioning professional to first decide the number of repetitions the athlete will perform an actual program for exercise being tested. Okay, assigning training loads with and repetitions. So there's a couple methods here. You can see one. You can estimate the 1RM. You have someone perform a 10 repetition max. I'll show you the procedure coming up here in a sec. And you can basically go through, once you get that, kind of estimate out the 1RM. This will then consider the influence of a training goal on the load and repetition assigns. Or you could directly test the 1RM. In a lot of ways, depending on the athlete, not a bad route to go. Everyone wants to know roughly how much they can bench, how much they can squat. I don't know if you necessarily need to do a 1 rep max repetition, but it's a good idea to have kind of, you could do like a 3 rep maximum. That's not a bad way to kind of, it gives you a good idea of where your athletes are and how strong they are. The problem is, what I mean is, like, I like testing for a repetition maximum, but you got to be careful though too what kind of stress you are putting on the body. Okay, squats put a lot of stress in this. It's not really the best. I'll give you an example. Trent Richardson, who played for Alabama, I forget how many years ago. Well, they were testing 1RMs there, and he got up to 700 and some pounds. Okay, you get to that point, you're strong. Okay, you don't need to squat any more than that because you are absolutely strong at that point. Okay, and so I'm in favor of doing some kind of rep maximum testing, but I think maybe a 3RM, 2RM, a little bit better than 1RM for certain things like the squat. Okay, it just is dangerous to put it on the athlete, but when you have that direct testing, though, the good thing is it gives you a more accurate ability to really design up a program. Okay, and it really help you to then know where your athletes are at and then how to really train them and implement a program that's going to bring about the greatest amount of performance. Okay, and you can see also then another method you can do too is, if you don't want 1RM, you can do the multiple repetition maximum, determine the multiple RMs. All this is really going to go into the training of the athlete, how to assess them, how to make progress, and all that. So there's a couple different ways to do this. I like getting closer to 1RM for certain movements. Okay, bench press, a lot easier to do a 1RM, and then as opposed to squat. Okay, most guys are not benching, 700 pounds. So you could easily have them bench and a little bit safer, assuming they don't drop the bar in the way with bad spotters. But hope you understand what I'm talking about there. But nonetheless, all these are getting you to then understand your athletes, get the assessment, helping to define the goals and the training load itself. Here's a protocol for 1RM. You can also do this for a 2 or 3 RM as well. Okay, so you have a athlete warm up. They could do 5 to 10 repetitions. Once they do that, whatever exercise you've chosen, then 1 minute rest. And from there, have an athlete complete 3 to 5 repetitions. You estimate the load. And then you kind of do, based off the warm up, do 3 to 5 repetitions. And you see right here, 10 to 20 pounds for upper body, 30 to 40 for lower body, or 5 to 10% for upper body, 10 to 20% for lower body. Once they complete those 3 to 5, rest 2 minutes, add the same amount, have them do 2 to 3 repetitions by increasing the same amount as we just talked about, then provide a 2 to 4 minute rest, and then do another load increase just like what we've seen, and then do 1 RM, a 1 rep, if they're able to do that, provide a 2 to 4 minute rest, and keep going back to number 7 until the athlete failed, or you can see continue increasing or decreasing the load until the athlete can complete one repetition without proper exercise technique, or they fail to get it up, or they need help from a spotter. Now, when you get to the upper levels of the 1RM, you can see the weight change. So you go 5 to 10 pounds for upper body, 15 to 20 pounds. That's when you get to the point where you know you're getting closer to the 1 rep. Okay, the same thing on this here too. You can also follow the same protocol if you want to do like a 3 rep maximum testing, or 2 rep. You can also do the same procedures here. Just change up the number of repetitions you want them doing. But this is the standardized technique or way for testing 1RM. So assigning load and repetitions based on the training goal. Once decided on, the training goal can be applied to determine specific load and repetition assignments via the repetition maximum continuum, percentage 1RM, or the results of the multiple repetition maximum testing. So this one you can see says use relatively heavy loads if the goal is strength or power. Use moderate loads for hypertrophy. Use light loads for muscular endurance. It says a certain repetition maximum emphasizes a certain outcome, indicated by you see the larger font sizes, but our training benefits can be are blended at any given 1RM. And this is that continuum that they're talking about right here. So the large font is showing you exactly the goal within the rep ranges. So you can see at the top, strength, up to about 6 repetitions. And I mean, the rallies, you're going to get stronger no matter where you train. But if you really want to focus on strength, do that less than 6 repetitions with the heavier weight associated with the table we just talked about. Power, a little bit less. You can see up to about 5 repetitions is going to be more power focused there. And then you can see next one down, hypertrophy, about 6 to 12 reps where you really see the hypertrophic gains. And the last one, greater than 12 repetitions for endurance. Okay, it's all of it's a blended continuum, as we can see, but more or less, if you want to focus on strength, keep it below 6. If you want to focus on power, keep it below 5. Hypertrophy, 6 to 12. And you can see endurance, 12 or greater than 12 repetitions. And it says assigning load and repetitions based on the training goal, percentage of 1RM. So there's a relationship between the percentage of 1RM and the estimated number of repetitions can be performed at that load. The training goal is attained when the athlete lifts a load of a certain percentage of 1RM for the goal number of repetitions. Particular load and repetition assignments are indicated for athlete training for single effort power events, such as shot put, high jump, weightlifting, and multiple power events, basketball and volleyball. And you can see right now, less than 6 repetitions, but greater than 85% of a 1RM should be the load percentage and repetitions. Power for the single effort, so 1 to 2 repetitions, 80 to 90% of 1RM. Multiple event, 3 to 5 repetitions, 75 to 85% of 1RM. Hypertrophy, 6 to 12, 67 to 85% of 1RM. And endurance, greater than 12 repetitions and less than 67% of 1RM. So this is how you'll know to assign repetitions along with load percentage. And make sure you kind of follow this rule right here. Because if you're doing 6 to 12 repetitions but greater than 85%, you're going to start inducing way too much stress on the body and you start to break down. Okay, so be careful, but just know, okay, these are what you should be doing between load and goal repetitions here. You got variation in the training load, so heavy days, it says are designed to be full repetition maximums. The greater your resistance can be successfully lifted for the goal number of repetitions. The load for other training days are reduced to provide recovery after the heavy day while still maintaining sufficient training frequency and volume. So you might come in for a heavy squat day and doing, sets of 5. That's, as much weight as you can. Or the next day, you're going to cut back the intensity and to allow the body to recover as much as possible. And it says you got the 2 for 2 rule. This is a conservative method that can be used to increase an athlete's training loads. So if an athlete can perform 2 or more repetitions over his or her assigned repetition goal in the last set and 2 consecutive workouts for a given exercise, weight should be added to that exercise for the next training session. Make sure, though, if your athletes are making progress, you need to constantly increase in the load. Too many times, people fail because they keep doing the same thing they've always done. So if you come in, you train, and you hit your ideal load and repetition goals, well, after 2 times, then already says if you hit 2 or more repetitions over the assigned goal for 2 consecutive workouts, well, that means then you need to increase the load. Okay, and try to constantly increase in that stimulus as much as possible. Other progression, so this timing load increases. As the athlete adapts to the training stimulus, loads must be increased and improvements will continue over time. As I was saying, you need to constantly monitoring athletes to help bring about these increases to help them keep gaining strength. We'll see in the next slide. General recommendations for how to increase over time. It says variation in training status, volume loads, exercise greatly influence appropriate load increasing. It says relative load increases of 2.5 to 10% can be used in place of the absolute values in table 17.10. So you can see here's the table right here. For your smaller, weaker, less trained for the upper body, 2.5 to 5 pound increases, lower bodies 5 to 10. For your larger, stronger, more tearing muscles, you can go upper bodies 5 to 10, lower bodies 10 to 15. So this is a good recommendations to increase, when the athlete's starting to make progress consecutively. These are small increments that will help adding that new stimulus, but you're not doing it to a point where you're going to start breaking the body down because you're progressively increasing the adaptations along with the increases in weight. So use this as a good recommendation for increasing loads and repetitions. And you got volume. So you got multiple versus single sets. So single set training may be appropriate for untrained individuals or during the first several months of training. There's some research showing that just one set of a decent amount of weight is enough to start inducing adaptations. They say it might be best for untrained individuals. You can see here, it says many studies though indicate the higher volumes are necessary to promote further gain in strength, especially for intermediate and advanced resistance trained athletes. So it's not really necessarily a bad thing they have untrained people do kind of a similar workout as a trained person. It just, you cut down the intensity. So that's why you're not going to be damaging themselves. So it's kind of what you feel is best for your athletes, but most time having athletes do the normal workout but just cutting down intensity is probably one of the better approaches. It says it's appropriate for an athlete to perform only 1 or 2 sets as a beginner, and that sets as he or she becomes better trained. It says training volume is directly based on a resistance training goal. So there's all things you need to be knowing as a coach, just looking at this, like we're talking about the status and the kind of the goals there. But nonetheless, keep adjusting the volume to helping out with maintaining those goals and helping induce that stimulus to the athletes. And it kind of depends on what you feel is best. If you want to do a couple sets for your athletes or have them go through a whole training program, just make sure the intensity is set at a point to where they're not damaging themselves and allowing them to grow, develop technique, and to make that progress. So here's sets. So if you're looking at strength and power, you can see for strength, less than 6 repetitions, 2 to 6 sets. And then power for 1 to 2 repetitions for the single effort, 3 to 5 sets. Multiple effort, 3 to 5 reps, 3 to 5 sets. Hypertrophy, looking at 6 to 12 repetitions, 3 to 6 sets. And endurance, greater than 12 reps, 2 to 3 sets. So once again, this is a very good table to be using for developing a program based around now fully the reps and the sets to give us that volume. You got rest periods. So it says between sets and exercises called the rest period or interset rest. Kind of other terminology for that. So it's dependent on the goal of training, the load lifted, and the athlete's training status. So if your strength and power, both of them 2 to 5 minutes. Allow the body to fully recover to be able to do that next set. Let ATP stores get built up as much as possible. Not ATP stores, your creatine phosphate stores to be built up as much as possible. That way you could go through the next set at the same intensity that you did the first set. Hypertrophy, doing 30 seconds to 1.5 minutes, and endurance, less than 30 seconds. So that's another way, too, to reduce overtraining, giving the ample rest time between each set to allow the greatest amount of stimulus to be incurred during each subsequent sets. But if you do want to get more out of your workout, altering up rest period is a good way to do that. Okay, if you're doing strength, maybe cut down the rest period a little bit more, and especially hypertrophy. Maybe instead of doing the 90-second rest, have your athletes do 60-second rest. All that will induce further changes as well. Okay, as you can see from what we talked about here, there was a lot that goes into building a program, and hopefully, ideally, a successful program. Okay, so when designing a program, you need to then look at needs analysis. Okay, what type of athlete do you have, and what's the sport that they're competing for or trying to play? Based upon that, then you look at what exercises are best for the athlete. And then you go into how much do they train? Frequency. And then you go into, from there, what's the reps, the sets, the order of the exercises, the volume, rest periods. All of these aspects that go into then designing a program. Because it's much more than just doing, certain sets and exercises to get an athlete stronger or bigger. You really you want to make as much progress as much as possible. You want to progress, that progressive overload. Building a little bit more upon the athlete each and every time they train, hopefully ideally getting them to the point where they're at their best for competition. Okay, and so remember the definitions we talked about. Remember the needs and the analysis of the athletes. When you're looking at, overall exercise prescription, what are you looking at with that? Well, needs, evaluation, frequency, training, exercise order, volume, load, repetitions, rest period, all of that. Those are all that goes into overall the prescription for the athlete. And just remember, the goal of the strength professional is to allow for the athlete to keep making progressive overload, keep adding a new stimulus, to keep growing, along with staying healthy and staying safe, and for the longevity and allowing for the longevity of training and for competition. So there's a lot that goes in this profession. There's a lot that goes into being a strength coach, and there's a lot that, like I say, the art of strength conditioning, art of strength coach, there's a lot that goes in to developing and building up athletes, much more than just writing a few exercises down, sets and reps. So remember all the definitions, talk about the examples we talked about, just know the main concepts, and then all that will help you to understand the exercise prescription for an athlete and how to adjust that being a strength professional, strength conditioning professional, how to make the changes, how do you adjust to keep allowing for that progressive overload, as well as safety and health.